watching Sailor Moon for so long is that Sailor Mars in particular is so inconsistent, at least between Classic and Crystal. I was really curious about that. Like, I was sitting there and I was thinking about that, and I decided I wanted to do a little bit of research. I didn't do some insane research, but I wanted to look into the differences between the different depictions of Sailor Mars. So we're just gonna jump into that. I did all of my research, by the way, on the Sailor Moon fandom page that was dedicated to Sailor Mars, and I'm only going to be looking at manga, Crystal, Classic, and live action PGSM. I didn't really look at Sierra Mew, I think that's how you say it, because it didn't say much about her personality that I could find. And I haven't watched PGSM because it is not dubbed as far as I'm concerned. It's only subbed, and you all know how much I dislike watching things that are subbed for various reasons. And I haven't read the manga yet. But I do trust this fandom. It's very detailed. People always do a very good job, and I feel like I can trust the things that I read on the fandom. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about Sailor Mars' different depictions. We're gonna start with the core essence of who I believe Sailor Mars should be, and that is her manga adaptation. She's psychic, she's quiet, she's calm, she's mysterious, she's stoic. She has this strong disdain for romantic relationships and resents men due to her poor relationship with her father. She is very traditional, and she works at her family's shrine. I do think being a shrine maiden actually impacts how traditional she is. However, she's also extremely loyal to the Guardians, which honestly, with all of the other traits that she has, I think fits her perfectly. Like, when she would trust you, she'd trust you very strongly because she's so mistrusting a person. Biggest of all, she has a good relationship with Usagi. She does not have an antagonistic relationship with Usagi. So already, this does not sound like the hot-headed psychic we hear about in Classic. That is the rendition of Sailor Moon most people know about. But I mean, adaptations change things about characters all the time. I mean, this essentially kind of flipped the character on her head. But like, let's look at some other adaptations and see if they did that as well, if they deviated from the source material that far as well. I would also like to say that it sounds like from this description, Manga Mars has a personality, which is not something I can say for the next rendition of Sailor Mars. Let's talk about Crystal's Mars. So in Crystal, we know that Rei is psychic. She works at her family's shrine. At first, she seems very cold, very distant. I guess that adds to like the mysteriousness and the seriousness of her that we see in the manga version. You know, she doesn't really warm up to Usagi or Ami until after they've like defended her. But she's very similar to her manga counterpart. We do at some point see, I vividly remember she said something at one point about not trusting men. And I was like, that's the Sailor Mars I've been hearing about. And I don't think that it's surprising that the Crystal version of Mars is very similar to her manga counterpart. I will say though, Sailor Mars had no personality, absolutely none. She was so boring that I barely remember anything about her from the show. So I don't know what was going on. It has to have been the writing, because Christina V is a phenomenal actress, and I've never heard people really complain about Rei's manga depiction having no personality, but I might have just been missing out on some kind of debate. But definitely in Crystal, absolutely no personality, super boring character, actively disliked her. And I didn't dislike her because of her bad behavior. She's actually very sweet to Usagi and every other character. She was just so boring. Like, she might as well have not been there most of the time. All right, let's talk about the live action show Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon. So in Pretty Guardian Sailor Moon, Rei is psychic. She works at her family's shrine. She's a loner. She has a lot of difficulty trusting others because of her relationship with her father. She's very independent, and she's extremely close to Minako Aino. That is something that I know about PGSM, because I did read up on PGSM, because I've heard that it's a really good adaptation, that it deviates a lot in the story. But the characters are very similar to their originals. And something I loved was that Rei and Minako have a very strong bond that is not present in any other adaptation of Sailor Moon. From the clips I've seen on Instagram, because I can stand to watch a couple subbed clips, Sailor Mars does have more personality. She does not seem that boring, and I do think that giving her and Minako, who does have a very tragic end to her arc, such a strong bond and relationship, especially considering what she went through with her mother and her father, really adds to Rei as a character. And I do think I could very well assume that Rei isn't suffering from what I call crystal syndrome, at least not in PGSM. So overall, she's pretty similar to her manga counterpart, except for like the whole being super close to Minako and everything that happens with Minako. I'm not gonna spoil that. She's very similar to her manga counterpart. So far, these two adaptations, Crystal and PGSM, Rei is very well adapted. Like, we know it's Rei. She's been adapted from the manga very well. It's pretty much a 1-to-1. So now let's talk about Classic, where we get a huge deviation from who Rei is. So Rei is a firecracker of a girl. She's still a psychic. She's still working at her family's shrine, but she is boy crazy, let me tell you. She has insane ambitions. She wants to be an idol. She wants to be a singer, a songwriter, an actress, but then she also eventually wants to settle down with a family. She just wants it all, which is something I liked about the character, was how ambitious she was and how determined she was to get what she wanted out of life. She's extremely loyal to all of the Sailor Guardians. I mean, loyal to a fault. Even Usagi, whom she has a very turbulent and antagonistic relationship with. But I think that that's interesting, because this version of Rei seems to have a very interesting way of showing affection. The people she seems to be closest to and have the most like care for, she treats the worst. Like, she is mean to Usagi and Yurichiro, but she treats them like garbage sometimes, or it's the teasing. But like, at the end of the day, she's always there. She always supports them and she always loves them. I mean, I always believed that Rei and Usagi were actually the ones with the closest emotional connection in Classic. And, you know, the bickering was just Rei's way of showing how she loved Usagi. But, I mean, she so clearly deeply cared about Usagi in so many ways. One of the biggest examples I can think of is in season 5 in Sailor Stars. Rei is the first person Usagi opens up to about Mamoru not writing her back, and Rei literally, like, verbally out loud wonders why Usagi has to suffer this much. She's also the one that Usagi trusts to hold on to the moon stick in, I think it's season 1. Usagi could have given the stick to anyone. She could have given the silver crystal to anyone. She gave it to Rei, someone who's mean to her, antagonizing her constantly and always making fun of her and making her cry. She gave that girl her most precious possession to guard. I think there's a little bit more to it than just an antagonistic relationship. So very clearly, this version of Rei, the very first adaptation of Rei ever made, is wildly different from her manga counterpart. Now, the reason exactly why this happened is pretty highly debated. I have heard 3 theories that I think make pretty logical sense. But one of the 3, I don't know how logical it is. I just thought it was an interesting theory. So the first one is to further differentiate the Guardians from each other. I do think that Rei did not have a differentiated enough personality for a TV show from the other Sailor Guardians. I do not believe it to be an inherently bad thing to amp up a personality a little bit for like a television show. I think TV shows are very different from books or like written entertainment. It also could have been to make her more fire-based. She has the qualities of a fire-based character. She's feisty, she's easy to set off, she's very independent. Like, all of these are things you would think of when you think of a fire-based character. And the last theory is interesting, and I cannot remember where I first heard it. I believe it was in some kind of analysis video about Sailor Moon, or maybe it was like a history video about Sailor Moon. I can't remember. I believe it was a YouTube video though. And it was that one of the, I don't know if he was an executive or a producer, maybe he was an animator, maybe he was a character designer, I don't know. He was at Toei. He worked for Toei Animations, was obsessed with Sailor Mars. Like, loved Sailor Mars so much that it went into his future projects as well. We're finishing the video with a dog in hand. So where did I leave off? We were talking about one of the producers or execs or something at Toei on the show was obsessed with Sailor Mars and wanted to make her more like his ideal woman. That is the theory, that this guy loved this drawing of a girl so much that he changed her entire personality to be like his ideal woman. Now, I don't know how much I believe that, but I remember, like, I don't know, maybe I'm just gullible, but I remember being like, oh, that's plausible when someone said it in a video. I could be wrong though. And I do have one last thing that I want to bring up, and it's like my last point, and that is, you know, how I think Sailor Mars was able to change so much. So if we look at the 2 adaptations that Sailor Mars stayed very loyal to her manga counterpart, and then we look at Classic, The common denominator you'll find is that Naoko Takeuchi herself had a lot more involvement in Crystal and PGSM than in Classic. And a lot of that's because, like, she was writing the manga at the same time Classic was being produced. I think it was hard enough for her to write the story, like, for the manga, let alone, like, be involved in writing the anime. I think that her having more involvement allowed her to keep these characters loyal to what she wanted. Now, I'm still not 100% sure why they decided to flip Mars on her head, essentially, but I do think it's a really interesting topic, and I do think that it's something that fascinates me and that I think about sometimes, because I do believe she is, first of all, the character that got screwed the most in Crystal, and second of all, the character that got changed the most for Classic. Like, dude, the Rei from Classic and the Rei from the manga are, like, different people. Actually, the Rei from Classic and any other adaptation of Rei are, like, different people. But I'm excited to hear what you think. What do you think about Sailor Mars? Do you love her? Do you hate her? Do you think that she was just annoying? Do you think that, you know, one version was better than the other? Do you think Sailor Mars and Crystal was actually really, really good? Because I don't think she was really, really good. I think she sucked. I think they screwed her over. But maybe you disagree with me. Convince me. All right, stay safe, stay smart, work hard. Bye.